The second half of this chapter is about World War One, so we're really moving along in history. Part of what was going on before World War One was that during the late 1800s and early 1900s, there's less isolation worldwide. Increasing industrialization leads to more interaction with the rest of the world. Earlier, in the Spanish American War, which was Cuba going to war with Spain and America coming in on the side of Cuba, the result of that war was that Cuba gains independence and the Philippine Islands become a U.S. territory. So that's two examples of more interaction with the rest of the world running in the run up to World War One. Woodrow Wilson was the U.S. president. There's a Georgia connection there. He grew up in Augusta. In Europe, there were lots of complicated alliances in the run up to World War One. For instance, if country A and country B are allies, but country C attacks country B, then because they're allies, country A is obligated to attack country C. There was a spider web of alliances in Europe before the fighting actually started. Now, what sort of tipped things over the edge was the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Empire's heir, Franz Ferdinand, by a Bosnian Serb terrorist. If all this sounds very complicated, that's okay. It is. Tomorrow we'll talk about it in a little more detail, and I've got an animation that will help you understand it. But the two sides are the Allies, the Triple Entente, with Serbia, Russia, Great Britain, Belgium, France, and later on, near the end of the war, the United States. The Axis, or the Triple Alliance, or Central Powers, are Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it's this group against this group. Fighting began in 1914 when Germany launched a surprise attack on neutral Belgium on its way to invade France. Because of that system of alliances, um, Germany ends up invading France, and Great Britain has to come to has a treaty with Belgium, so that's how they get into the fighting. Both Great Britain and France set up naval blockades to prevent anybody from helping the other one. Great Britain sets up blockades to keep anyone from trading with Germany, and Germany sets up naval blockades to help to prevent anybody from helping Great Britain. Germany uses U-boats, submarines to enforce the blockade. It's there were German U-boats off the coast of the United States because they wanted to prevent the U.S. from trading with their enemy, Great Britain. Now, eventually, the U.S. does enter the war. Wilson, especially when he was first elected, was neutral, and he campaigned saying, we need to stay out of that European war. And he was elected. One of the things that began to change people's minds was that in 1915, a cruise ship, um, the Lusitania, was sunk by a German U-boat, and there were 128 Americans aboard who died. That begins to change American opinion. At the same time, fighting goes on from 1914. This is where you have trench warfare. If you saw the movie War Horse, you saw some examples of that. Poison gas was first used in World War I. Machine guns and airplanes All of those were part of the fighting in World War One. In 1916, Woodrow Wilson is reelected, still pledging to keep us out of that European war. But the United Germany continues U-boat attacks on United States shipping. That helps turn opinion. But the thing that really did it was something called the Zimmerman telegram. The U.S. intercepted a telegram from Germany to Mexico, promising that if the U.S. enters the war, Germany will help Mexico regain territory that it had lost to the U.S. The U.S. basically interprets this as an act of war by Germany. I mean, they're encouraging Mexico to go to war with the United States. So, as a result of this, the U.S. declares war April 4th, 1917. How did World War I affect Georgia? First of all, the main benefit is that lots of military camps were set up and established. Camp Hancock in Augusta, Wheeler in Macon, Souther Field in Americus, Fort McPherson and Camp Gordon in Atlanta, and, important for us, Camp Benning is set up in 1917 to train infantry troops. It's also good for Georgia's economy. Cotton from Georgia is used for uniforms. Food grown in Georgia is turned into canned rations, and textile mills take that cotton, turning it into uniforms. So all of this was very good for Georgia businesses. By the end of the war, the United States troops, they were called doughboys, helped tip the balance. And the group that we were helping um, basically defeated Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Russia, who had been part of things at the beginning, had dropped out of the fighting because they had the communist revolution going on, which you have actually learned something about reading Animal Farm. So we'll talk about that in class. In January of 1918, Wilson issues something called the 14 Points. It calls for something he calls a League of Nations, a group of people that can hopefully sit down and talk about things before stuff like World War I happens. Fighting stopped on November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. And for a long time, that was called Armistice Day. Eventually, in the United States, that was changed until to be called Veterans Day. So that's when we remember veterans from all of our wars. The Treaty of Versailles is technically what ended the war. It was very harsh and punished Germany. We'll talk about exactly how it did that. The harshness of the Treaty of Versailles is one of the things that leads to World War I 25 years later. We'll talk about that in class. Even though the League of Nations had been Woodrow Wilson's idea, the United States was not a part of it. The U.S. Senate at the time would not agree for the U.S. to become part of the League of Nations, so we weren't. Right at the end of the war, winter of 1918, there was a Spanish flu epidemic. Struck young adults, 40 million worldwide, more than died in the war. In Georgia, it caused 650,000 deaths. And that is it for the rest of the chapter.